Hello everyone, welcome. I'm David Swinowski with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today we are going to carve the small turtle silhouette. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to use 3 pieces of sandpaper to carve and shape this and then smooth it out and bring out some beautiful natural color. So if you want to get a little bit closer, we'll get started with these 3 pieces of sandpaper and I'll show you how to carve a little sea turtle. Alright, so here we have our basic sea turtle silhouette. You know, very, very slippery. For soapstone, that's how it gets its name, is its texture and its natural state. You're going to notice this rock is so soft we can actually scrape that just with our thumbnail. But to do our shaping here today, we're going to use this coarse 60 mesh sandpaper to do our primary shaping on this stone here today. With all the sandpapers, they're all made for water, so I like to get them all wet to start. Same with my stone. I'm going to put that right in the water here as well. I just need enough water to basically submerge my rock. That's all I'm looking for. One of the things we need to remember is we're only removing stone. We're not adding any rock to this at all. So for the turtle, for example, one thing that I want to stick out is the shell. I want that to kind of stand out a little bit. The only way for me to actually get some depth on that would be to carve all 4 flippers down a little bit. So when I'm going to do some carving and some shaping, I'm going to take my 60 mesh here. I'm going to fold this in half. It's going to give me a nice ridge right here, a nice coarse edge that I can use to do my primary shaping. So I'm going to use this sandpaper and scrub all the way around, creating the outline of that tortoise shell or the turtle shell here. And I want to try and keep that shell as big as I can. So I'm going to carve the head down a little bit and then all 4 of those flippers as well. How far am I going to go? Well, the more depth I want on my shell, the lower I have to make those flippers. I don't think I need to go halfway. And I don't even need to go straight across. I can also angle it a little bit if I wanted to, just to create some added dimension to this piece. But I'm pretty much just going to start by lowering those flippers just to get it started. And this is where the thumb technique comes in really handy. And that's just pushing on that concentrated area with your thumb to really scrub into that rock. And start to remove some of that stone. Now, as we're carving here, any of that dust we make, we can rinse off, trap it in the bucket of water. Your sandpaper is also going to get filled up with some of that dust and silt. So what we're going to do is we're going to rinse that off as well and just keep all the dust inside that bucket. So the stone we're carving here today is from Brazil. Brazilian soapstone is known for its softness, but also its beautiful color range as well. It's really, really fun working with this material. You can see that thumb technique really goes a long way when working in smaller concentrated areas. You know, just a couple of scrubs and you can already see I've got a little bit of a ridge forming right there on that bottom part of that shell. That's what we're looking for. We want to raise that shell up. Pardon me. And just trying to stay on the same kind of line here. I can carve into here a little bit because I'm still going to be lowering these flippers, so I'm not too worried about me contacting the flippers as I come across, because I'm still going to be carving those down anyway. Constant pressure, constant contact, just trying to stay in that one area where I'm really trying to scrub that stone away. And it takes a little bit of time, but you know what? It gets there. Now I'm kind of thinking about the general shape of my shell and how I want that to look. Oval, diamond shape, squarish, roundish. And I find for the turtle, this is the majority of the work, is basically grinding those 4 flippers in the head down a little bit. Deciding what kind of patterns, if any, you're going to put on your shell as well. We can put some nice groove patterns on here, you know, whether all the way up and down or even crisscross. You know, we can put any pattern we want on there. I think that's one of the greatest things about the sea turtle, is that you can put your own design onto the shell, and I think that's a lot of fun. It's a great way to really customize the piece itself. Kind of round that head off as well. I don't want to have straight blocky head here. I'm going to round off those corners as I'm working here and lowering that head down. I'm not going to lower the head as much as I lower the flippers. But I definitely want to make a definite ridge line between the top of the shell and the back of the head. I'm even going to carve underneath that chin as well, just to lift the head up off the bottom of the base of the carving here. So it's just going to give it a little added details to the carving itself. It's not too bad for the general shape of the head. Okay with that, but I am definitely going to be bringing these flippers down even more. I've just got a basic start on those. You can kind of see how the shell's starting to protrude a little bit, but I definitely want a little bit more depth on that as well. So I'm just going to continue working on those flippers. As I was saying, it's going to be the majority of the work for this particular shape. Lots of rinsing. As you're working, you're going to start filling up that sandpaper with that dust. It's just going to make that sandpaper less effective. So the more rinsing you do during your shaping, find the quicker that shaping can go, because your sandpaper is working more effectively. It just makes it easier. I'm not pushing too hard on these flippers when they're by themselves. You know, as I'm making these flippers thinner, if I'm putting too much force or pressure on here, I could possibly snap one of those flippers off. So I do want to use a little bit of sensitivity, even supporting it from underneath with some fingers as I'm pushing down and scrubbing up above. Although if you're going to be a stone carver, you're going to break some rocks. I guarantee that, just part of the game. If it should happen when you're carving your soapstone sculpture, just stop, let your carvings dry. You can just use a super glue or an epoxy, glue those pieces back together. Once that glue dries, then you can go right back to either carving or sanding, depending on what part you're at when that break occurs. So as I lower these flippers, I'm going to start looking at it from the back view just to try and make sure that they're both the same thickness. So that's what I'm going to be looking for now, is symmetry in the depth of the carving that I'm making right now. I want the flippers to be roughly the same thickness. And the best way to get symmetry is just to stop, take a look at it, maybe even from different angles. I'm going to put like a little bit of a slant on these back flippers as well. And I might even carve some grooves on them. If you find your sandpaper is starting to work less effectively, try using a different spot. Turn it around, flip it over, open it up, refold it, using new spots on that sandpaper. So you can see I've definitely got those back two flippers lowered down. I've got some angles kind of working down. Each one's kind of sloped down towards the middle. I'm going to do the same with these front flippers as well. I'm going to lower those down a little bit more. Using that thumb technique to really focus on those concentrated areas. Good support of my rock, got a good hold on that, good grip on it. Always making sure I'm staying over my bucket. That way if I accidentally drop it, it's just going to fall into my water. Not nearly as big a deal if it was to fall over onto the floor. That'd be a little bit more dramatic on that stone. So try and stay. All my dust is going back in here, all my water staying in here. So it really helps trap any of the mess I'm making indoors. I love carving stone. I don't really enjoy cleaning up big giant messes. So the more I'm using my bucket, the better it is for cleanup time as well. Great thing about the Brazilian with these different colors, you're going to see quite a bit of a range in the different color in the Brazilian stone, which is great. Different shades of brown, different shades of green, maybe even some that are so green they're actually black looking as well. That's like the purest form of the soapstone, is that really glossy black look. Beautiful steatite. So the draw is typically brownish stones are usually softer. Green's kind of in the middle, and then the pure black is like your denser, harder version. So with the brown stone being softer, it's easier to carve. But the deal with the harder stones is the harder a stone is, the better a polish it'll take. So if you're looking for that nice, shiny, wet look, the harder that stone is, the easier that's going to be to achieve. And there's a bunch of different products out there that you can use. We provide tung oil for our kits here to help keep that color out. But you could use Danish oil. There's even beeswax if you want to go a more traditional route, which is also really beautiful. A varathane spray paint if you wanted to kind of do it a little bit easier. With the softer stone, they can tend to absorb a lot of oil, so you might have to do more than 1 or 2 coats on that to really get an effective oiling on some of those softer rocks. Just kind of trying different things and seeing how they work. But with that difference in the hardness, that's also going to affect your carvings as well, because you're going to notice that, you know, one of the carvings, it was super soft. You were able to really accomplish your goals really quickly. Whereas with the other harder ones, it might take you a little bit longer. So not every single sculpture in soapstone is going to work exactly the same. You're going to get some variations in the hardnesses in the stone, as it is a metamorphic rock. So we will get some changes in there. So as I've got those flippers really lowered right now, you can definitely see I've got a definite ridge for my shell and the flipper here. I can also add some detail to this shell. It doesn't have to be straight across or flat. I'm going to dome this as well, so I'm going to lower it towards the back end. You might notice that as I've been carving, the spots where I have already carved, the color's a little bit more predominant. You can see it coming out. When we cut these shapes out, it leaves a gray striping tooling mark on the stone. You want to make sure that even if you're not going to sand it or shape it, I should say, you really want to sand it just to help get that natural color out of there. So if you take a look, little small scratches that I've made with my first sandpaper are fine. I want to make sure I'm getting rid of any of that gray tooling pattern that's in my stone. As I turn it sideways, you can really see some of the gray spots along on the backs of the flippers and the sides. I want to make sure I'm getting rid of all of that to really help that natural color come through. And for those, it just needs a quick once over. It doesn't take a lot. You don't want to over sand. You just want to get rid of that tooling mark grayness to really just help that color come through. That's all we're trying to do when we're not shaping it. We just want that natural color out. And I'm just going to go around my entire carving here and just make sure that I've got all that gray striping gone. Hard to reach areas, you can fold that sandpaper up a couple times. Just tuck it into those areas so that it matches that general shape. Put your finger in there to kind of widen it out, and then just slip it back and forth. And that doesn't work too bad. Does a pretty good job to get into those tighter areas where my fingers can't reach. I'll fold and manipulate my sandpaper to get it to where I need it to go. And then even the bottom of the carving here as well. If I just give it a light sand, I'll hold that up a little bit closer. If you kind of see, you can really kind of see where that gray striping goes. It's kind of, they're all going to be following like the same general line. You want to make sure you really get rid of that as much as you can. And with it being stone, there's no grain in here, so you can sand in any direction you want, which is pretty handy as well. So, just little swirling scratches, that's good. For the bottom, that's fine. Going to add some angles to this shell right now. Try not to push too hard. I don't want to pop these two little bottom flippers off, being that they're a fair bit thinner than they were when I started. Just trying to work on the shell itself, rounding off those square blocky edges. Adding a bit of a ramp effect to that shell. When you're working effectively, you can really see that dust kind of build up. Really going to fill up that sandpaper as well. Lots of rinsing involved when I'm carving. And as I'm lowering the back end of that shell, if it starts to kind of meld into those back flippers, I'll just carve those back flippers down a little bit lower to give myself the separation between the shell and those flippers. A little bit blocky here on the sides of the shell. I'd like to kind of round that out a little bit more, but my sandpaper is a bit too wide, so I'll just open it up and fold it more than once. Just fold that 2, 3, 4 times. So saying I'll manipulate my sandpaper to get it to the shape that I need to accomplish the design that I want on my carving. I'm just going to pull that through. I don't want to get rid of a ton of material. I'm just trying to kind of round off that turtle shell itself. And it's not going to take a lot, because the stone is soft and the sandpaper is pretty coarse. Try not to carve into that flipper. Just trying to work on the shell. And it's just that little bump that's right there. I'm just trying to round that out a little bit more. This one I'm pretty happy with. Just need a little bit more work on this other side. It's a little better. Not quite as blocky. So now for the top of the shell, I just want to make sure that that's kind of matching up to the neck evenly on both sides. Symmetry is kind of the toughest part in the carving. So just do a couple movements, make a couple strokes. Pardon me. For the symmetry, just kind of do smaller movements, do a little bit of work, stop, check it. It's pretty easy to go too far. And then if you go too far on one side, then you have to remove it from the other side to help even it out. It's kind of a little bit of a back and forth sometimes. But the more carvings you make, the easier it gets. Kind of get used to doing it. A little bit more in here. So the spots in between the flippers and the shell, that's gonna be your toughest area to get at. Just got to be patient, right? Kind of keeping an eye open for any of those gray stripes from the bandsaw. I'm just getting rid of those as I'm kind of working my way around. I'm also looking for any deeper scratches. You know, I want to make sure that any of the scratches that I do have right now are shallower so that they're easier to remove once I actually go to sandpaper number 2, because this is a 60 grit we're using right now. Sandpaper 2 is a 320 grit. So because it's so much smoother, it's going to be that much more difficult to also get rid of the scratches that you don't want. So if we can make sure that we have a nice consistent texture on our stone, it's really going to make sandpaper number 2 a lot easier as well. I'm also going to carve a little notch for the mouth on this guy. I think I need to use a new ridge. I think this other one that I've been using for a while is pretty worn away. You can see how the grit is really starting to wear off there as well. So I'll just refold a new spot. And then just really pinch that tight so that's as narrow as it can be. And then this was the way I'm going to make the groove for the mouth on this guy. I'm going to bring the bottom in a little bit. So that the snout protrudes a little bit further out than the bottom jaw. Not too bad. Okay with that. Remember, because this is such a soft stone, we are pretty limited to the details that we're really going to get into this carving. It's not like a harder jade or an agate where you can get really fine, intricate details on that. We are somewhat limited, so, you know, respect our limitations on this particular media and just kind of work with it, right? Remember, sandpaper number 2 is also going to do a bit of removal as well. So you can just get close with sandpaper number 1 once you've done your shaping, and then you can always finalize up some of your shaping with sandpaper number 2 as well. So I'm going to put some grooves in these flippers now. Trying to stay on the same path, you know, like a train on the track. Just chewing my way in there. Nice, bold. I'm just going to turn that sandpaper around, use the other side of that same ridge to help finalize my other grooves here. Works for me. And I'll put some in these upper flippers here as well. I'm going to fold and use a new spot. And when I'm making grooves or ridges, I always try and flatten my sandpaper as much as I can. I want to try and keep that ridge as narrow as possible for this. If you're at home and you have steel tools like rasps or chisels, you could always use that on this stone as well. But if you don't have any, you know, it's not necessary. You know, you can actually do a pretty good job just by using sandpaper with this rock. Just takes a little bit longer, that's all. Rounding off that top of that shell where it meets up with the back of the head, just trying to get rid of some of those really square blocky edges. I'm not a really big fan of leaving it all kind of squared. I like to really soften a lot of edges and do a lot of rounding personally. It's kind of up to you. You get to choose your own style in this. That's what's a lot of fun too, right? Be expressive, be artistic. Pretty happy with that. Some good grooves on all four of those flippers, you know, pretty bold. I've got them deep enough. I don't think I have to worry about them being erased with sandpaper number 2. So now I'm just going to think if I want to put anything on the shell itself. Maybe even just a light groove pattern across the top here. And I'm just trying to make sure I'm not scrubbing it to the top of the head or these back flippers right now. I'm just trying to make sure I'm staying on the shell only. And I'm not going to make these top ones quite as bold as I made the ones in the flipper. I definitely want to make sure that they're going to stay, so you really should be able to see them. But I don't think that they need to be as bold or as deep as the ones on the flippers themselves. So kind of want a softer striping pattern on the back. Open up, refold. Pinch that paper as flat as I can. pretty close. Like as I was saying, I don't think I need to make these ones as bold as the flipper patterns that I have, the grooves. So just about done here. A little off to an angle, but you know, I'm not too beat up about that. It doesn't have to be perfect for me. I could even go across here and make a crisscross pattern if I wanted to. I don't mind that. If I wanted them to all be perfectly symmetrical, I would have probably started with the middle of the head and then lined it up with the middle of the tail here on the shell. And I would have just made my first line there and then worked on my sides from there. But I'm not too worried about symmetry on the grooves on the shell because each turtle is unique. But I will lower the back of that shell a little bit. Just add a little bit more angle to the curvature of the shell as it goes towards the back of the flippers. Before I switch over to my 320 grit here. Make sure my grooves are in there again. Rinse it out so I can see. I'm pretty happy with that. I like it. All the grooves are pretty close to the same depth. I think I'm done with sandpaper number 1. I'm gonna knock the water out of there, get rid of it. So you can see I've added a little bit of a slope to the back of the shell. All my flippers have been narrowed or flattened a little bit to help raise that shell up as well. Got a rounder head, a little bit more detail. I find their heads are a little bit like a hawk almost, you know. Got a bill on there. All the grooves are bold. I'm pretty happy with that. So once I'm happy with my general shape, I can go to sandpaper number 2, which is a 320 grit. All the sandpapers again are made for water, so each one will be going into the water. I definitely recommend it. It also makes the paper more pliable, so it folds to your shape a little better. For sandpaper number 2, we did leave little scratches behind with sandpaper number 1, so now we're going to get rid of the little scratches that we don't want. And because we have one more sandpaper that's even finer than this one, we want to make sure all the scratches we don't want to see are gone before we go to sandpaper number 3. So another thing that I would look for is I would be making sure that when I'm rinsing off my turtle or my carving, I'm not scraping it on the bottom of my bucket. The reason being with sandpaper number 1, as we use this, you can see all the little fold spots. The grit has really been worn off those. All that silicon carbide is now on the bottom of my bucket, and it's harder than the stone that we're carving. So if we're scrubbing our soft rock against harder little bits of grit on the bottom there, it will be putting little scratches back into your carving. So for sandpaper 2 and 3, just try and dip it when you're rinsing it off, and then you should be able to really smoothen that surface. If you're able to, you can always switch your water as well. Just get rid of this water and just start with some brand new fresh water. That's another great way to kind of get rid of that, that problem as well. So sandpaper 2, we're going to get rid of those little scratches. And we're really going to change the texture on this stone. It's starting to get shinier, definitely getting smoother. And then we're just going to want to make sure any scratches that are left behind that we don't want, we want to get rid of. You can also fold sandpaper number 2 up. Just make sure that the writing side is not the side you're using. The side with the writing on it is just paper, and the grid is all on the opposite side here. So we're going to fold it, make sure the grit side is out. And then I'm just going everywhere with sandpaper number 2, where I want that beautiful natural color coming out. You did a good job with sandpaper number 1. if it's nice and consistent, Sandpaper 2 should be pretty quick. Although if you do go to Sandpaper number 2 and you start smoothing it out and you notice there's a really deep scratch somewhere, you can always quickly go back to Sandpaper number 1. Use it to make that deeper scratch a little bit shallower so that you can easily erase it with Sandpaper number 2. Sandpaper 1 does all the shaping and prepares the surface for Sandpaper number 2. And then Sandpaper 3 is just going to smooth that existing surface that we have. And it's going to feel more like glass when we're done. But any stone you're carving, it's a process. It's not one thing you're going to do. It's a multitude of things you do. And the harder that rock is, the more steps that are going to be involved in that process. But with soapstone being so soft, you know, three goes a long way. 3 steps. That's it. I like using that thumb technique with Sandpaper number 2. Lots of rinsing. And for those tough to reach places, again, just fold that sandpaper up a few times. Tucking into those hard to reach areas, you know, that way it fills that gap for you as best as possible. I also find with the water softening the paper in here, it also helps kind of fold and form and fit into all those tighter spots where your fingers really just can't get to. Sides of the shell are going to be one of the tougher spots to get to because, you know, it's tough to fit your fingers in there. And that's where folding it up multiple times are really going to help as well. Gives a little bit of substance to the paper so you can still kind of push on there and just do the best job possible. I think I'm just going to sand the ridges in the shell itself. I'm going to leave the ones in the flipper alone because once the ones in the flipper are oiled, it'll be a nice little contrast, I think, in the piece itself. It'll really help kind of show off those grooves in the flippers, just to add some depth to the piece itself. But for the shell, I don't mind if it's perfectly smooth up there. So I'm going to fold that sandpaper up and then also sand those ridges that I made, the grooves. I'm just looking for any gray spots, any scratches left behind. That's all I'm looking for right now. Looks pretty good. So once all the scratches I don't want to see are gone, I can go to stage 3. And with stage 3, just a quick once over, and that's all it takes. Especially if you did a good job with sandpapers 1 and 2. Just taking my time to make sure I'm getting those grooves on the back really well. And I think Sandpaper 2 is probably my favorite. You know, this is where you really start to see the natural colors of these stones really coming through in Sandpaper 2. Plus the textural difference is pretty dramatic as well. So even though it's not the final Sandpaper, I'd say Sandpaper 2 is probably my favorite one. It's pretty good. So once I'm finished with Sandpaper number 2, again, just kind of knock that water out. Sandpaper 3, the very final one. 600 grit. In the water it goes. Again, I'm making sure I'm not scrubbing my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket because of all that rock that I removed. It's all down there. And then there's like little bits of that silicon carbide grit that's hiding in there. I really want to make sure I'm not scrubbing that into my stone. So, last step, just a quick once over. That's all we need. All the real work was done with Sandpapers 1 and 2. So now it's just kind of finalizing it up. Make it feel like glass. Ooh, really, really smooth. Fold that sandpaper up as well. Like to pinch that edge so it's nice and flat. Just kind of go over everywhere one more time. Just really smooth this stone out. Again, I opted to leave the flipper grooves kind of rough so it's a nice contrast in the texture on the stone, where I did smooth out the grooves on the back though. Just folding it up, getting into those harder to reach areas right now. That's it. And if I didn't like the grooves that I put on here, you know, if I changed my mind, I could always go back to Sandpaper 1, get rid of them, dome that down. But just remember, every time you do that, you are making your carving smaller. So you want to try and make those decisions, you know, relatively quickly if you can. Try and design it first. Think about some of the things you might want to do before you commit to carving. That's always a good idea. Google Image is great if you want to be really realistic. You can always just punch up 1,000 different pictures of the animal that you're carving, which is really helpful. Just being careful now because, you know, near the end, this is where I see probably 90% of the breaks. It's near the end where you get close, you start rushing because you're really close. You only want to just get it done. Just take your time. Stone carving is a process, not a race. Just want to make sure you're thorough and consistent with each individual stage. That's really all you really want to do. Very smooth. Once I have completely finished my carving and I'm very happy with it, I'm going to rinse this off in clean water. I want to get this dusty water off of my carving so that when I do my oiling, there are no dust particles left on my rock at all. And that way I'll get a nice even finish on this stone as well. I usually like to let this sit overnight just to make sure it's completely dry. Even if it didn't break, there could be some seams or something in that stone. It might even be a softer stone that might have been more porous, might have just soaked up some water. You want to make sure it's completely dry before you do your oiling. So, you know, if you let it sit overnight, it's definitely going to be dry enough the next day. It'll be kind of similar gray color to when you first started, you know, just not quite as rough textured, you know, be very, very smooth. Or it was kind of slippery before, now it's really smooth. And the natural colors are really popping right now as well, especially using the water. The water isn't traditional, but it's definitely functional. It's trapped all the mess we've made, all that dust that I've taken off, all the stone I've carved, all that dust is in the bucket. You know, it's not all over. It's all trapped in here, so I can swirl this up, either flush it, dump it down out in the yard. If, you know, with one small little carving, if I just did one small carving, I would put this down my drain. If I had a whole bunch, you know, if I was carving for the whole day and there was a bunch of dust, I try not to put it down the drain. Yard or the toilet's a great place to put it though. All right. You know what? All the scratches that I don't want to see are gone. Got a little bit of texture in those back flippers, but that's what I wanted, so I'm pretty happy with it. I feel like I'm done with my turtle. Got some nice little patterns on there. So I'm going to go rinse this off and start that drying process. All right, so now that our carving is dry, we can do our oiling. I like to just put on a piece of paper towel just to kind of protect the surface that I'm oiling on. I like to also oil the bottom of my carving first so that when I flip it over and complete it, it's already kind of faced the way it should be. So with the oil, just using that Q-tip, dipping that in there. Just nice, even coating. That's all we need. I'll bring those natural colors out. And just taking our time. Making sure I get underneath that chin. So now that the whole bottom is completed, I can just flip that over. And now I'll just get the other side. Make sure you tuck it into all those little nooks and crannies. Should be a nice even finish where I kind of left those flippers a little bit textured. You know, it should have still a little bit of texture hiding in there, which is okay. It's kind of the individuality of each of these carvings. To kind of do your own thing. Decide if you want it perfectly smooth or not. And if you wanted to change it up, you always can. Just remember, you're going to be making it smaller every time, but just because you oil it doesn't mean you can't touch it or change it up if you wanted to change something. I've had carvings where I let them sit for a week or two and decided, you know what, nope, I'm going to change that up. You can always go back and change it. Just remember, it's a process, and as long as you just repeat those steps in the finishing process, you'll be fine. Just moving this around, just making sure I got every spot as good as I could. I like to let this oil sit for at least 2 hours, just to kind of get into that stone before I wipe off any excess. All right, and that turtle is oiled. All right, and that is the finished sea turtle kit. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. I really enjoy carving the turtles. It's a lot of fun. You can be really unique in this particular shape. You can do pretty much any pattern you want on that shell, and I think that's a really big draw on that. I hope to see some of your carvings as well on our site if you'd share them with us. If you like some of our tips and tricks, please like and subscribe on our sites. We'd love to see some of your work and hear from you as well. Thank you very much. I'm David Swinowski with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits.